Cuba's regulatory authority has approved the second phase of the pediatric clinical trial using the Abdala vaccine against COVID-19. High-level talks between China and the United States on Monday highlighted their differences and the continued lack of will on the part of the US to advance relations. Tunisia's president froze parliament and dismissed the government in a move denounced by opponents as a coup. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Cuba's regulatory authority has approved the second phase of the pediatric clinical trial using the Abdala vaccine against COVID-19. The trial will be carried out in the province of Camagüey and will involve children and young people aged between 12 and 18 who will receive 3 doses of the vaccine with a 14-day interval between each. Abdala is the first Cuban-made vaccine against COVID-19 to be authorized for emergency use. It's also the first vaccine against the novel coronavirus to be developed in Latin America and has shown efficacy of 92.28%, ranking among the most effective jabs in the world. This Sunday, 88 tons of humanitarian aid sent by Russia to help Cuba in the fight against the novel coronavirus arrived at Havana's international airport. The shipment includes medical and personal protective equipment as well as foodstuffs. This is the first of 2 flights with humanitarian aid to Cuba announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin as part of the ongoing cooperation between the two nations in the face of US sanctions. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced on Monday that his country will send 2 ships of humanitarian aid to Cuba, while again denouncing the United States blockade policy against the island.
I take this opportunity to say that we made a decision out of solidarity in the face of this situation of blockade, which wants to politically subjugate the Cuban people, the Cuban government. We made the decision to help, to provide our solidarity in the face of this blockade, because it is not enough to vote every year at the UN against the blockade. And I take this opportunity to call on all countries of the world that what they express at the UN by voting against the blockade should now be converted into an act of solidarity with the Cuban people.
The Mexican president also defended the right of the Cuban people to live free of foreign interference.
It is a respectful call. It is not an act of interference of any kind, but it is necessary to separate the political from the humanitarian. Life is the most important thing. It is the most important of human rights, the right to life. Many things could be done. I suggest only one, with all due respect to both nations, that families in Cuba be allowed to receive remittances from those who live and work in the United States.
Cuba is celebrating the 68th anniversary of the attack on the Moncada barracks by a group of young Cubans who sought to bring down the Fulgencio Batista-backed dictatorship. Although the attempt to seize control of the barracks failed, leading to the slaughter of most of those involved by the brutal regime, it served as a rallying cry to build the movement to overthrow the dictatorship, which would become known as the 26th of July movement. The date is marked each year as a crucial part of the struggle led by Fidel Castro, which would see years of guerrilla warfare waged by men and women in the Sierra Maestra, culminating with the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. Due to COVID-19, the usual mass rallies and festivities are not being held this year, but Cubans enjoy several days of national holiday to mark the symbolic date with their families. And this Monday, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel commemorated National Rebellion Day by getting his hands dirty alongside young people working to produce food in Havana. In a visit to a farm in the capital, the president joined those undertaking voluntary work to help support efforts to produce crucial local supplies. He was joined by Hero of the Republic Gerardo Hernández, one of the Cuban Five and leader of the community-based Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, with whom he discussed the challenges facing the country and the initiatives to advance. The Cuban president also emphasized the importance of engaging with the younger generations of the country who will shape its future. St. Lucia is holding general elections this Monday. Voters will elect the next 17 members of the House of Assembly, the lower house of the Parliament of St. Lucia. Candidates were previously nominated on July 16th. International observers, including from the Caribbean community, are present on the Caribbean island to oversee the development of the electoral process. In Colombia, forced displacements in rural areas of the northwestern department of Antioquia have aggravated as violence continues to spiral out of control. Regional authorities report over 3,500 displaced people forced to abandon their homes due to the threats of armed groups operating in the area. Territorial disputes between paramilitary organizations are a key motive. Several human rights organizations denounced massacre number 57 so far this year, in which a woman and 2 minors were the latest victims of the surge in violence in the South American nation. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. High-level talks between China and the United States on Monday highlighted their differences and the continued lack of will on the part of the US to advance relations. Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Xi Feng said during talks with US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman that the China-US relationship is now in a stalemate and faces serious difficulties. He noted this is fundamentally because some Americans portray China as an imagined enemy. The Chinese officials stressed that mutual trust and mutual benefit should be the preconditions for bilateral cooperation and that both powers should seek common ground. Following the meeting, the US official said the two sides had held an in-depth exchange of views on a wide range of issues of mutual concern and even on cooperation in various areas including climate change, the Iran nuclear deal and the Korean Peninsula.
In fact, China has been playing responsible and constructive roles on these issues. What should be emphasized is that cooperation must be based on mutual trust, on the premise of mutual benefit, and on the necessary condition of a good atmosphere of bilateral relations. The US should adopt a correct view of cooperation. It simply won't work when the US seeks cooperation with China while harming China's interests at the same time.
China's eastern coast was put on the highest alert as Typhoon Infa made a second landfall on Monday morning, bringing downpours to surrounding regions. According to the Chinese Met Department, provinces in the eastern part of the country will see heavy winds and torrential rain over the next couple of days. The Shanghai municipal government issued an emergency warning on Sunday afternoon, requiring employers to make appropriate arrangements to guarantee their employees' safety. Local authorities have been vigilant after torrential rainfall in Henan province led to devastating floods that left 69 people dead. Typhoon Infa has affected over 100,000 people and damaged more than 200 hectares of crops since making its first landfall in Zhejiang on Sunday. As deadly monsoon rains ease, rescue works began in western India this Monday. Rescuers waded through waist-deep mud to reach injured residents and started a massive clean-up operation after heavy rains triggered landslides and floods that killed over 150 people. The western part of the country was hit by heavy rainstorms, with 250,000 people evacuated from their homes in 3 states and power cut across vast areas. Experts say climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of the annual rains, which are critical to replenishing rivers and groundwater, but also cause widespread death and destruction. And we continue in India, where 9 people were killed by a landslide that destroyed a bridge in the mountainous northern state of Himachal Pradesh. India's Met Department has warned of further downpours over the next few days. Flooding and landslides are common during the monsoon season, which also often sees poorly constructed buildings collapse after days of non-stop rain. Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi met with United States President Joe Biden at the White House this Monday, where they discussed the so-called new phase of the US military mission in the country. Biden confirmed that the United States will end its combat mission in Iraq by the end of the year, but said US troops would continue to train and assist Iraqi forces as they battle the Islamic State. The US has about 2,500 troops in Iraq after a series of drawdowns in recent years. Their presence continues to be condemned by the Iraqi population, and the parliament has called for all foreign troops to leave the nation. Al-Kadhimi told reporters that there is no need for any foreign combat forces on Iraqi soil, but emphasized that Iraq will still seek US military assistance in training and intelligence gathering.
And the sacrifices that so many have made to build the US-Iraq partnership.
In the United States, firefighters are battling the bootleg fire in Oregon, California, which in the space of 2 weeks has burned the equivalent of the city of Los Angeles in vegetation and forests. Over 5,000 firefighters are battling the blaze that has grown so big it's generating its own weather system, with authorities warning conditions could worsen. The flames have grown so large that they've created clouds that can cause lightning and high winds, which in turn can serve to fuel the fire. Fires have already ravaged 3 times more vegetation this year than they had at this time in 2020, the worst fire year in California's history. Despite its size, the fire has so far ravaged extremely remote areas, destroying the few dozen homes and small buildings in its path. Raging forest fires in central Sardinia, Italy have forced the evacuation of 900 people as flames threatened some residential areas and others were engulfed by dense smoke. According to the Deputy Chief of the Firefighters Emergency Department, no deaths or injuries have been reported and the situation seems to be under control. The wildfires, which broke out over the weekend, have been spread by dry southerly winds. 4 firefighting planes from France and Greece joined the Italian air fleet to help control the blazes, which have consumed around 20,000 hectares in the province of Oristano.
It is an unprecedented reality in Sardinia's history. Huge firestorms favored by weather and climate conditions absolutely at the limit. Up to now, 20,000 hectares of forest that represent centuries of environmental history of our island have gone up in ashes. Currently, the situation for the people in the zone of Oristano, Sardinia, affected by the wildfires, seems to be under control. This feeling obviously depends directly on the weather trends that, for the moment, let us foresee a confirmation of these hypotheses. In any case, the operational centers in the area remain ready, and up to now, about 60 firefighters are still working, in addition to the assistance of the civil protection, to try to monitor and bring the situation back to normal.
Canada installed Mary Simon as its first Indigenous Governor-General as the nation faces a reckoning with its colonial past in the wake of the discovery of mass graves of Indigenous children. Simon, a former broadcast journalist, diplomat and advocate for Indigenous rights, previously served as president of Canada's National Inuit Organisation. She was also leader of the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, which represents the organisation in all Arctic countries, as well as Canada's first Inuk ambassador in Denmark. Her appointment in the largely ceremonial role, in which she serves as the official representative of Queen Elizabeth II, a lasting reminder of British colonialism in Canada, and Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, comes as the government of Justin Trudeau attempts to claim it's working to address the abuses against the Indigenous population, amid the outcry over the recent discovery of more than 1,000 unmarked graves at former residential schools where Indigenous children were forced to assimilate to the white European culture. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Tunisian President Kais Saied froze parliament and dismissed the government on Sunday in a move announced as a coup. The move marks a dramatic escalation of the political crisis in the country. Anger over the government's handling of a massive recent spike in COVID cases has added to general unrest over the nation's economic and social turmoil. President Kais Saied, who was elected in 2019, announced he was taking over on the basis of Article 80 of the Constitution, which establishes he can take exceptional measures if there's an imminent threat to the country. However, the Constitution does not mention anything about dismissing the head of government, lifting the immunity of lawmakers, or freezing Parliament for 1 month, measures that he's already adopted.
First decision, freezing the functions of the Parliament. The Constitution does not allow its dissolution, but allows the freezing of its activities. Second decision, the lifting of the parliamentary immunity of all deputies. Third decision, the President of the Republic will take charge of the executive power, with the help of the government, which will be headed by a new leader appointed by the President of the Republic.
Sunday saw widespread protests in Tunisia as citizens took to the streets to protest both in favour and against the government. Most demonstrations were centred around Parliament, blocked off by the military in the country's capital. According to local media, there were violent clashes. There's concern that the government paralysis could derail efforts to negotiate an International Monetary Fund loan seen as crucial to stabilising state finances, which would also, as always, involve spending cuts that would aggravate the economic pain for ordinary people. A United Nations spokesperson said the organisation is following the situation in Tunisia very closely after President Kais Saied's suspension of Parliament and dismissal of Prime Minister Hichem Mechichi.
We are following the situation in Tunisia very closely since the announcement by President Saied yesterday. We call on all stakeholders to exercise restraint, refrain from violence, and ensure that the situation remains calm. All disputes and disagreements should be resolved through dialogue. We're hoping that the situation will remain calm, and we're trying to see to it that all the various parties on the ground do what they can to ensure that the situation does remain calm. Obviously, as you just noted yourself, the region is a very volatile one, and it's certainly a region that cannot bear to have more unrest than it has presently had.
The Israeli regime launched a series of airstrikes on several sites in the besieged Gaza Strip late Sunday night. As part of the ongoing attempts to starve the Palestinian people, Israel has also reduced the fishing zone off Gaza by half. Israeli fighter jets targeted a plot of farmland northwest of Gaza City and a plot of land east of Khan Yunis, causing material damage to the sites as well as to the nearby civilian property. No casualties were reported. The strikes came after the Zionist regime reduced the fishing zone off Gaza from 12 nautical miles to 6 nautical miles, a move it claimed was in response to the launching of incendiary balloons from Gaza into Israel by the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas. 14 years following the supposed Israeli disengagement from Gaza, Israel has not actually disengaged from Gaza. It still maintains control of its land borders, access to the sea and airspace. 2 million Palestinians live in the Gaza Strip, which has been subjected to a punishing and crippling Israeli blockade for 12 years and repeated onslaughts that have heavily damaged much of its infrastructure while killing thousands. "5 million displaced Syrians have returned to their homes thanks to the improved security situation in the country, still suffering from foreign interference and terrorist groups. The figure was revealed during a joint Syrian-Russian meeting in Damascus on Monday, aimed at monitoring the results of the International Conference on the Return of Syrian Refugees, held in November 2020. During the meeting, it was reiterated that the Syrian government will continue to take all measures to facilitate the return of the displaced and ensure the conditions for them to lead a dignified life. It was also stressed that US and Turkish occupation of parts of Syrian territory, illegal coercive measures and attempts to prevent the reconstruction process in the country are preventing the return of displaced Syrians, while their suffering is exploited by foreign interests to serve their hostile agendas. Lebanese businessman and former Prime Minister on 2 occasions, Najib Mikati, secured enough votes in parliamentary consultations on Monday to be designated the head of a new government. The political move comes amidst the country's financial crisis, deemed by the World Bank as one of the worst since the 19th century. 65-year-old Mikati first came to be Prime Minister in 2005 as caretaker for 3 months following the death of former PM Rauf Hariri and other officials in an explosion. Mikati stepped into office again in 2011 under circumstances similar to the present scenario, when the previous government resigned and a lack of consensus among different parties pushed the country into a spiral of instability. Mikati was at the time supported by current acting President Michel Aoun, Hezbollah and the Progressive Socialist Party, organisations that favoured him in the recent cabinet appointing meetings. Once again, Mikati returns to the post in a hostile environment, hoping to bring unity to the divided nation amid an increasingly pressing financial, economic and political crisis.
In constitutional steps, it is necessary that I have the trust of the lawmakers, but in reality, I want your trust. I want the people's trust. I want the trust of every man and woman, of every youth. I don't have a magic wand, and, alone, I can't make miracles happen. We are in a very difficult situation, and you all know that. We must all stand together. I know it's a difficult step, but I tell you I am assured. I've been studying this situation for a while. If I didn't have the necessary external guarantees, and I didn't know that it was time for someone to be in the forefront of this issue to limit the spread of the fire, I wouldn't have taken on the job to be named Premier Designate.
The man accused of the failed magnicide of interim president of Mali, Assimi Goïta, has died in custody, according to a statement from the country's authorities. The suspect died in hospital while in the custody of security services, the government said in a statement on Sunday. The suspect's identity was not disclosed, and an autopsy is pending to determine cause of death. The detainee was accused of attempting to stab interim President Goïta a week ago amid Eid al-Adha prayers in the Rey Faisal Mosque in Bakama. Now we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.